As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believes in him may have eternal life. John 3:14 through 15. Why does Jesus compare himself to a serpent in John chapter 3? Why do other passages from the New Testament seem to provide parallels between Jesus and the serpent from Genesis 3? In John 11:26, Jesus says, "Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." The serpent tells Eve if she believes him, she will never die. In John 10, Jesus quotes Psalm 82, saying, "Ye are gods." The serpent says, "God knows that in the day you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God." Genesis 3 says Eve took and ate. At the Last Supper, Jesus says, "Take, eat." Genesis 3, the serpent was more clever than all the animals. In Matthew 10, Jesus tells his disciples to be wise as serpents. Some Gnostics tried to recast the serpent as a Promethean hero, but that is not the point of these parallels, and definitely not the message we get from the Bible. There's something going on here, though, that should catch our attention, because these passages do highlight a pattern that we should be aware of. Before going on, we will turn to 1 Kings chapter 3. The chapter can be broken up into two stories, and both are relevant to our topic. Verses 1 through 15 tell us about Solomon's vision of God, where Solomon requests wisdom and the ability to judge or discern between good and evil. Verses 16 through 28 gives us an account of a dispute between two women, where Solomon uses his God-given wisdom to reach a resolution. We will read the first half of the chapter now, and then come back to the last half of the chapter later. Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house, and the house of the Lord, and the wall around Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places, because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said, "You have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in truth and righteousness and uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne, as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. But I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" The speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. Then God said to him, "Because you have asked this thing, and not asked for long life for yourself, nor asked for riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done this according to your words. See, I have given to you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before, nor shall there arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honors, so that there shall not be anyone like you among all the kings of your days. So if you walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days." Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. And he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants. Years ago, someone suggested to me that 1 Kings 3 and Genesis 3 were an example of a Bible contradiction. The idea was that Adam and Eve were cursed for pursuing the knowledge of good and evil, but Solomon was rewarded for a similar ambition. Solomon asked for understanding to discern between good and evil. There is a key difference between Solomon and Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve take the fruit in direct opposition to God after the serpent entices them by telling them that their disobedience will result in them becoming like God. The big selling point is not only that they will not die, but they will actually become like divine beings. Solomon's pursuit of wisdom differs starkly. We see that he approaches God in humility, saying, "I am a little child. Give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil." Later, in Luke 18, Jesus says, "Whoever shall not receive the kingdom of God as a little child, he shall in no way enter into it." Christ has in mind here the childlike humility that Solomon exhibited in 1 Kings 3. On the other hand, we also know children can be impatient and think they know more than they really do. We might best see Adam and Eve's sin as pride and impatience. First, we will address the issue of pride. Paul surely had Genesis 3 in mind, contrasting Adam and Eve with Christ when he wrote, "Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who though being in the image of God, did not consider grasping at being equal with God, but poured himself out, taking the attitude of a servant, and was made just the same as all ordinary men. And being perceived as a normal man, he humbled himself, becoming obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. Wherefore God highly exalted him, and gave to him the name which is above every name, that in the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth, and those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." When Eve reached for the fruit, she was grasping at equality with God. Adam and Eve already had a concept of right and wrong. This is obvious enough from the fact that they were given a commandment that they were expected to follow. The commandment would have been nonsense if they didn't already have some working concept of right and wrong. To the extent you could say they did not know, you can only say that they had a lack of direct experience. The Bible does sometimes use the word or phrase "to know" in the sense of having a revealing experience. When Abraham is stopped from sacrificing Isaac, the angel says, "Now I know that you fear God." In Genesis 4:1, when it says Adam knew his wife, it didn't mean he met her, that he just met her that day. These were revealing experiences. When Adam and Eve wanted knowledge of good and evil, it means that they wanted to engage with good and evil, to experience things on their own terms and decide for themselves what was good and what was evil. Something to add more clarity to this point that we can't get from English translations is the similarity of the Hebrew words for naked, arum, and clever, aram. Prior to the vowel pointing in the original Hebrew text, arum and aram would have been indistinguishable because only the consonants would have been supplied. So instead of reading that Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed, we could also read it, they were clever and not ashamed. Or when God asked, "Who told you that you were naked?" we could read the question as, "Who told you you were clever?" The idea is that Adam and Eve were clever, but not as clever as they thought, so their pride in their cleverness ultimately exposed their own nakedness. Going back to the idea of impatience, we need to remember that Peter describes salvation as becoming partakers of divine nature. Adam and Eve were made in the image of God, so the idea from the beginning was that they were supposed to be like God. The Garden of Eden was a type of temple. In ancient temples, the last element to be added was the idol, the image of the particular god that was supposed to be worshipped. It was expected that the spirit of that god would take up a unique presence in the image. Adam and Eve were the image of the true God, made so that his Spirit might fill them and work through them. In this way, they could become like God and be partakers of divine nature. This is why we should see, at least in part, Adam and Eve's sin as impatience. They were made to be like God, but they were supposed to become like him on his terms. If a child wants to be like an adult and a productive member of society, it often includes learning to drive a car. But this needs to be done on the parent's terms. If the child is impatient and thinks he or she is clever enough and steals the keys, it's probably going to result in an accident pretty quickly. The pride, impatience, and cleverness of the child will eventually expose the child's weakness and inadequacy and actually delay their becoming like an adult. Children often have difficulty seeing that their attempts to overtake or outmaneuver their earthly parents just results in a longer road to becoming like the adult they aspire to be. When we are patient and wait for our Father in heaven, we will ultimately get better results. Isaiah 40:27 through 31 makes this point. Why do you say, Jacob, and speak, Israel? My way is hidden from Yahweh, and the justice due me is disregarded by my God. Haven't you known? Haven't you heard? The everlasting God, Yahweh, the creator of the ends of the earth, doesn't faint. He isn't weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the weak. He increases the strength of him who has no might. Even the youths faint and get weary, and the young men utterly fall. But those who wait for Yahweh will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. We get impatient and think God owes us something. The justice due to me is disregarded by my God, as verse 27 puts it. Verse 28 says, his understanding is unsearchable. If we grasp at the knowledge of God like Adam and Eve, like impatient children, then we'll never actually reach it. Verse 31 tells us, if we wait patiently for Yahweh, our strength will be renewed. This doesn't mean we wait passively. Like Solomon, we do need to approach God, but we need to approach him with a childlike humility. We need to have a proactive patience and a persistent patience. The parable of the unjust judge in Luke 18 makes this point. There was in a city a judge who did not fear God and had no regard for man. And there was a widow in that city, and she came often to him, saying, give me justice against my adversary. And for a while he would not. But afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor regard man, yet because this widow troubles me, I will give her justice, lest she wear me out by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And shall not God give justice to his chosen, who cry to him day and night? Will he be slow to help them? The widow from this story was patient. She did not try to take the law into her own hands, but besides being patient, she was also persistent and proactive. The next parable in Luke 18 also relates to our topic, but gives a little different scenario. Two men went into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice in the week, I give tithes of all that I get, but the tax collector, standing far off, would not lift up so much as his eyes to heaven, but struck his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, the sinner. I say to you that this man went home rendered righteous rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, but he that humbles himself shall be exalted. In this story, both men are proactive. They both make the effort to go to the temple to approach God. The Pharisee is clearly persistent, saying, I am not as the rest of men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. Yet the Pharisee is the one who is condemned, and the tax collector is justified. The key difference here is pride versus humility. The tax collector would not so much as lift his eyes up to heaven, saying, "God, be merciful to me, the sinner." The parable ends concisely saying in one line what Paul expands on in Philippians 2. Everyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, but he that humbles himself shall be exalted. At this point, you may have forgotten that we were going to come back to 1 Kings chapter 3 to discuss the last half of the chapter. So we'll start at verse 16. Now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, "My lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then it happened the 3rd day after I had given birth, that this woman also gave birth. And we were together. No one was with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side, while your maidservant slept, and laid him on her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. But when I had examined him in the morning, indeed, he was not my son whom I had borne." Then the other woman said, "No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son." And the first woman said, "No, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son." Thus they spoke before the king. And the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one.' And the other one says, 'No, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one.'" Then the king said, "Bring me a sword." So they brought him a sword before the king. And the king said, "Divide the living child in 2, and give half to one and half to the other." Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son, and she said, "O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him." But the other said, "Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him." So the king answered and said, "Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother." And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. Verses 16 through 28 recount a story of 2 women, each having a baby of roughly the same age. One of the babies died, and each woman claimed that the living baby was hers. Solomon has no way to know which is the real mother and which is the liar. This takes us back to the parallels between Jesus and the serpent. Often the truth and the lie are difficult to distinguish. We have to have eyes that see and ears that hear. Is it Jesus or the serpent that truly offers participation in the divine nature? They both say, "Take, eat." They both offer wisdom and everlasting life. How do we know the difference between the truth and the lie? The difference is the cross of Christ. In the story of Solomon and the 2 mothers, Solomon proposes cutting the baby in 2 and distributing 1/2 of the body to each woman. Similar to how Abraham's faith is revealed through the expected loss of his beloved son, the true mother is revealed through the threat of the loss of her own child. The true mother only receives her child back when she is willing to lose him, and Abraham only receives his son back when he is willing to give him up to God. When we turn to the New Testament, God himself gives up his beloved son. Christ died for us while we were yet sinners, as Paul says. Jesus, the man who is truth embodied, was willing to die for us and have his flesh distributed to us, the same sinners who are responsible for his death. We are not like the 2 mothers in that we don't just have the expectation of a tragic death, but Christ really died as a testimony to his love for us and for God's love for us. As John's Gospel records, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." The cross of Christ is what divides the truth from the lie. As Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, We preach Christ crucified. To the Jews it is a stumbling block, and to the Gentiles foolishness. But to them who are called, both Jews and Gentiles, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is greater than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. It is the real encounter with the cross of Christ that reveals the truth and the thoughts of our hearts. As Simeon says to Mary in Luke 2, "Behold, this child is set for the falling and rising again of many in Israel, and for a sign which will be spoken against. Yes, and a sword shall pierce through your own soul also, that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed."